Hello friends, and welcome back for day 5 of Drenched in Wonder Cannabis Conversations. We are talking about the creative slipstream, and this is one that I'm just really excited to talk about. I love being an artist and a creative person. I make my living through creativity, and I love that. And I have found cannabis to be a tremendous effective tool for creativity. You know, we don't necessarily need to be pursuing creativity or artistry to find benefit in the creative powers of cannabis. So let's dive in. Now, first of all, thinking about how cannabis alters our perception, or perhaps enhances our perception. You know, like I've mentioned, it really enhances the senses. It enhances the ability to notice certain things, and ultimately the ability to connect the dots between seemingly unrelated topics. And that, as creatives, is ultimately, I think, what we're trying to do. We're trying to see something in a slightly different light. We're trying to see something from a different angle that most others may not. You know, we're trying to find our own unique way into whatever it is that we're exploring. You know, in that way, like thinking laterally, thinking unexpectedly, you know, making connections between different things to create new ideas. You know, that's what the artist is trying to do. And fortunately for the creative person, this is absolutely what cannabis does. Now, I talk about the creative slipstream, and once again, it's not that we can't be creative without cannabis, but we know the slipstream when we find it, when we find that flow state and like time disappears and we become completely immersed into whatever it is that we're focused on. And it's a beautiful thing. And finding that flow state is the reward in itself for artistry and creativity, I feel. You know, the other thing as creatives is that very often we're searching for something, you know, we're kind of in a way pushing up against it and trying to find those connections. We're making something out of nothing. And what I find is that sometimes I'm pushing up against that so hard and it's actually not working. But where I find that cannabis helps with this is that it actually just gently lowers the noise. It can actually calm things and allow the space for the thoughts and the creative inspiration to just breathe a little bit, you know, like take it just a step back and go, all right, let's approach this a different way. Sometimes that's all that's needed. And I think together with this like elevated and very empathic feeling of like everything's okay. And as I've spoken about, cannabis, it puts me in this beautifully childlike creative place. And this place where I just appreciate so much. I appreciate everything. You know, I appreciate our species. I appreciate nature. I appreciate our planet and the universe that we are part of. You know, and from that perspective, it's actually like, okay, you can kind of zoom out and everything's actually not quite as stressful as perhaps we're making it out to be. And I think, you know, stress and anxiety, this is something that really affects creative people and like artists a lot. And so I think cannabis used responsibly and used with care is a tremendous and very important tool in the creative's toolkit. And on that note, cannabis as a tool, not as just a magic button, like boom, creative mode, not necessarily. Of course, it depends on how we're feeling. It depends on our mindset. It depends on our environment, who we're around, you know, do we have distractions? There's obviously a very clear difference between creating with purpose and just getting lost in thought without any kind of meaningful output. And this is one of a few potential pitfalls or even a trap of cannabis and creativity, is that for many of us who use cannabis, that experience is a joyful thing. Sometimes it can just become an excuse to get high. Another thing that comes to mind for me is the difference between being creative and feeling creative. You know, fingers crossed these two go together. But in the past, and I speak from personal experience, there are times where I've used cannabis to feel creative and feeling creative, thinking that, wow, look, I feel so creative. I'm seemingly getting so much done, where I'm actually not. I'm actually just in that creative flow state with actually nothing much else happening. Now that may be useful, but I then realized, okay, the feeling of creativity is there, but the actual productivity, the actual doing something with that was not. And I was just kind of circling around in my own little creative echo chamber of joyful artistry. And there are worse things, but the artist, particularly the professional artist, needs to share. And so that's something that I realized for me personally, an area to be careful with. The illusion of creativity, the illusion of productivity. And then, of course, there's the importance of finding the balance, the right dose, the right timing. Very often when I've been in creative mode, it's like, okay, let's intentionally use cannabis to kind of enter this state a little easier and a little quicker, and I go too far. And suddenly I'm soaring high, and the thoughts, the ideas, the dots, they're all connecting so fast that I now feel scattered, that I now feel like I can't keep up, that they're happening faster than I can actually capture them. That, I found, is a very frustrating place to be. Because very often ideas and dots connect and then drift away so quickly before you've actually caught it. This is something to be very careful with and easily can run away with a lot of time, where once again, you're not actually creating anything of substance. And then of course, there is the temptation to rely on cannabis to enter that flow state. Becomes a crutch, a necessity. And for some, maybe it is a necessity. But for any responsible user and for any artist, we want to be doing this for a long time. We want to find a sustainable way of doing this. If we burn out because we're spinning the wheels too much in whatever we're doing, that's not good. So mindfully using cannabis as a tool to aid our creativity and to help us reach that flow state. And again, it's the area in which I've had the most experience and the most net positive. Since I first tried cannabis 12 years ago now, every single one of my creative projects has been influenced by cannabis in some way. And I'm grateful for it. It's not to say that I didn't hit up against certain walls. It's not to say that I didn't hit those pitfalls that I previously warned about. And of course, as always, we must treat it with care and respect. Remember that everyone's creative slipstream is different. Some people thrive with cannabis, but others may not. And of course, as responsible adult users, it's about experimenting and see what works for us and what doesn't. Mindful, sustainable use, right? And I haven't spoken about this a great deal, but the balance of THC and CBD, the actual flower that we're using. Not all cannabis strains are equal, of course. In fact, there is infinite variety. Some strains are ideal for medicinal purposes. Some strains are ideal for sleeping. And some strains are ideal for creativity. Again, it's not the same for everyone, of course, but it works for some and it works for me. And that's what I realized, very often when I was creating, I was spinning the wheels, frustrated that I couldn't figure out this thing. I couldn't get this thing to come to life. And then cannabis helped me to kind of take that step back, to look at things from a different perspective and to connect the dots in slightly different ways. But of course, knowing what I now know and knowing what cannabis showed me, I could still reach the same place. I could still do these same things, take a breath, take a step back, think about it in a slightly different way. I can do that without cannabis. All of us can. But if we're mindfully treating it with care and, we're avoiding these certain off-ramps that can kind of detour us off our creative focus, then there's no reason I feel that cannabis can't be a tremendous creative tool in the artist's toolkit. Take it or leave it, friends. I hope this helps. Let me know, what's your experience? Tell me in the comments. Cannabis, good for creativity, not so good? Looking forward to diving into our next episode where we're going to be talking about zooming out and using cannabis to help answer some of life's big questions. Thank you again, friends. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and check out my new book at drenchedinwonder.com. Be safe, be smart. I'll see you soon.